many of you came out. This is a great topic, a great venue. I want to thank Vern for all his help, and Shirley, and those folks from the Rose Historical Society who set me straight that the Rose Community Center is different than Rose Historical Society. And Jane for putting me in touch with all the right people. But we're really so pleased that we could bring this show on the road to another part of the county and share a little bit of history with all of you. You are very familiar with this topic, so before we get going, though, I want to tell you and share a little bit about Wayne County Historical Society. We've started a new podcast. How many of you have heard the podcast? 2. Oh, all right. Well, this will get you to listen to it. It's on our website, which is waynehistory.org, but we interviewed Matt and Mark yesterday, impromptu. So when we get that up and running, we'll send out an email and we'll have it posted on our site. But we're just so thankful that we're able to share more history this way. We're using technology, but we're telling stories and we're doing it in a fun way. Our next exhibit is going to be called Military Memories. And if any of you have gotten our newsletter or e-news, our email newsletter, you've seen that. And what we're doing is putting out a call to the community for members of your family, or you, if you were in the military, or you, if you have memories of letters coming home, or a son or a daughter or a father or a mother or a brother, or any military memory that you want to share with us. We've got a link on our website now, which just goes to a little contact form. We're not asking for the whole story right away, but you can reach out to us. Let us know that you've got a memory that you want to share, similar to the story we're going to hear today. And we're going to find a way to put that into our exhibit. So our Military Memories exhibit is going to cover all of the nation's military excursions, if you will. We're going to try to do that in a meaningful way. I'm not sure how we're going to lay that out, but your stories matter. And the people who lived here and worked here and served our country from this county are the folks that we're going to celebrate and commemorate in our Military Memories exhibit. So, with that, this Happy History Hour sort of kicks off our military memories because Mr. Matt Osborne has done the research along with the John Thomas family, which, where is,
Ed.
I can't remember, Ben?
Ed.
Ed, yes, Ed, and the other members of the family. Who are the other members of the family? Raise your hand, all of you in the front there. What an amazing story. And Matt's going to tell part of that story, as well as the connection to another local hero, Donald Putnam. And so, I'm not going to pretend to tell you any of that story, but I'm just going to thank you again for coming out. Mark DeCracker, who painted the mural,
along with our
Mural
team.
Mania team and his painters, Mark Williams, they're here. There's all the painters. We will unveil this at the end by lifting up the screen, and I think people will be able to come up on stage if you want, but you'll be able to see the mural from there. And I'm going to invite Mark to come up a little bit at the end and talk about the ideas behind this mural, why it got started, and where it's going to go to live after it moves out of Rose Community Center. So, without further ado, Mr. Matt Osborne from Alabama.
Thank you all for coming. This is a terrific turnout. I really appreciate your presence. And I thought that you would be here because you were there last May when we buried John. The whole town turned out with American flags and hands on hearts, and that was probably the most amazing thing I had ever seen. So, thank you. To begin with, if you go across the hall right here, you'll see this graduation photo, and both of them are on there, these two men I'm going to talk about. I'm going to mention the third. This guy right here, that's George Thomas. That was, it was his idea to join the Marine Corps before Pearl Harbor. And he was out with the fleet when Pearl Harbor happened, and he served in some of the roughest fighting of the war and somehow survived Guadalcanal and Okinawa. So, of the three boys that I'm talking about, he is the one survivor. The other two, John Blakesley Thomas, Melvin Donald Putnam, both became pilots. and took on some of the highest risk work you could ask for in the Second World War. And neither of them came home. It's my understanding that they were childhood friends, and that makes a lot of sense because they both preferred to go by their middle names. That's something that friends do. You get a couple of boys who are really tight, they'll do things like that. They'll say, well, we'll go by our middle names because we like those better. And the family calls them by their first names. So he was John to family, he was Blake to his friends. And of course they graduated in 1938, and Donald went to work at Eastman Kodak, which was a block away from the family home in Rochester of the Thomases. So they remained close right up to the beginning of the war. Of course, my great uncle, John Thomas, was the brother of my paternal grandmother. So that's how I knew him. He was a ghost in my grandmother's life. And she was rabidly anti-fascist as a result of his death. This is John with George. You can tell they were really tight, they were twins. And here is John with his pompadour, which tells you something about him. His Army paperwork, Army induction paperwork, listed his profession as actor, which runs in the family, I should tell you. And he was at Cornell when the war started. And these are the two young men with their planes. Again, when you have two boys who are very tight, what they'll tend to do is pick up complementary parts. One became a bomber pilot. The other became an escort fighter pilot. And you can imagine a scene, a Hollywood scene, where they say goodbye. And Donald promises to watch his buddy's six. That's how I imagine it went down. I can only imagine. No one is around to tell me what they really said, what they really felt. Donald had an apple on the fuselage of his plane. Most pilots, most of these young men going up in the air, they had, scantily clad women. And he chose to have an apple. He had his community with him when he went into the air. It was what was in his mind. Unfortunately, we can't see the apple because nobody took a picture of the plane from that angle. But there he is with his plane. And then next to him is John with a parrot on his plane. And I'm sure you're thinking, who is that parrot character? Well, actually, there's a story there. This is another shot of the plane. You see the nose arc a little bit better. The name of the plane was the Air, A-I-R-E, Lobo, as in Airwolf. Not to be confused with the 80s TV show starring Jan Michael Vincent. Completely different thing. But you can see the parrot there with what looks like a carnival woman, right? Dancing woman. And in fact, we had thought for a long time that man in the photo was John. I'm leaning now to the idea that this is a ground crewman, possibly even the person who painted the plane. Oh, and you'll notice he's wearing a glove because it was impossible to touch a hot metal airplane under the Benghazi sun in Libya. That's where this photo was taken, in Libya. So, the identity of this mysterious character is Jose Carioca. He is one of the more obscure Disney characters. Walt Disney was asked in 1942 to make a morale film to help American servicemen sort of meet the culture of Brazil when they were going down to Brazil. And as a matter of fact, the bomber crews that served in North Africa staged through Brazil. So he made it to Brazil, and he would have been in Natal, Brazil for a couple of weeks, and he probably would have seen this Mural film, and he would have been charmed by this character, who is one of the only characters in the history of Disney that actually recognizes Donald Duck when he meets him. Nobody else recognizes him. Who are you? We don't know you. But he knows Donald Duck. Oh, you're Donald Duck. And takes him on a tour of Bahia. And so it's available on YouTube if you search for Saluda Amigos is the name of the full video. You can watch the whole video. This is just a clip. And of course, he saw this and he must have thought, oh yes, that's what I want on my plane, because he was, again, an actor. Now, I'm going to start with John's story, because it's the one in which we have the most detail. Now, this is an overhead photo of Ploesti, which is where oil was first struck in the world in 1857. It was 2 years before the strike in Pennsylvania. And just to give you an idea of how strategically important this place had been for a while, in 1916, the Germans overran Ploesti in World War I, and it prolonged the war for 2 years. Had they not overrun Ploesti, they would not have been able to fight on for 2 years. So it was a strategic consideration from the moment hostilities began. Winston Churchill maintained forces in Crete and Greece, and he was advised, you can't hang on to those places. The Germans are going to kick you out of there. But he tried to hang on to those bases because they were within range of Ploesti. It was that important of a target to him. He called it the taproot of German might. And just to give you an idea of how correct he was, the idea was that they were going to shorten the war by 6 months with this mission. And 6 months after the Soviets finally overran the oil fields at Ploesti, the war was over. The Wehrmacht ground to a halt. If you read the descriptions of how the fighting went down in the final months of the war, German formations simply did not have the gas. So this turned out to be an effective strategy, and that is not true for all of the bombing strategies that they tried in World War II. You'll notice that the positions of the refineries are around the city. There's a ring of them around the city. And one of the things that the Germans did was they built an above-ground pipeline that connected all of these refineries, so that if one of them got knocked out, the others could pick up the slack. So you have a thinking enemy who is adapting and preparing for you. And the Americans did not understand just how much preparation the Germans had put in. They assumed, wrongly, that the defenses would be facing east, because that's where the Russians were. And obviously you want to stop the Russians from hitting your oil. So they thought that they could come from the direction of Germany, come over the mountains, and surprise everybody. And it didn't work out that way. This was also a unique mission in that it was one of just two, and both of them were targeted at Ploesti. It was one of two missions in which mass bomber formations approached at low altitude. And you can see in the photo just what I mean by low altitude. Already in that photo, you can see that a plane has gone up in flames on the ground. And the moment that this photo is being taken, this is actually Uncle John's unit. It's not, his plane is not in the picture, but it is his unit. And at this moment, they are flying alongside a railroad track. A lot of times, if you're going to navigate, especially at low altitude, you're going to follow some sort of road or railroad type land feature to make it easy to navigate. So they had planned to come in along the railroad. What they did not know is that the Germans had a train full of flak guns on that railroad. So a lot of planes were taking hits, taking casualties, getting shot down before they ever got to Ploesti. Another problem was that the Germans, who did not have as much success as the Allies during the war in cracking enemy codes and ciphers, they actually had cracked the code so that when the alert message went out, as the planes took off in Benghazi, they overheard the message and they were able to decipher it, and they knew that a large American bomber formation was in the air. That alert message was supposed to let Allies know, right? You don't want your British destroyer captain freaking out because he sees a bunch of bombers in the air and doesn't know who they are. So it was supposed to warn friendlies, and they ended up warning the Germans. And also, they had a problem with land navigation. They had never actually approached the real Ploesti before, and so they made errors in navigation. And because they were trying to sneak up on the Germans, sneak under the radar, be unobserved, unheard, they did not use their radios to correct the course. Right? Nobody said, hey everybody, we need to turn 15 degrees south or something like that to correct the course. So they came in all helter-skelter. The plan that they had carefully trained to follow came apart, and it became chaos. A good example of how no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And you always have to remember that the terrain, the weather, the circumstances, they are the enemy too. Now, there was a deliberate effort on their part to avoid civilian casualties. That was one of the reasons they came in low level like this. They were trying to avoid civilian casualties. And the resulting losses caused them to return. When they returned, they bombed from high altitude again, right? And they inflicted thousands of civilian casualties when they returned. But when they showed up in Operation Tidal Wave in 1943, the Romanian civilians were actually really impressed that the Americans had done this, had come in and caused so few collateral casualties. But it did not stick. The encounter between Romanian civilians and Americans is a whole story in and of itself. It is worth talking about. If there was more time, I would go into it, about how the Romanians reacted to the Americans and the Americans to the Romanians. It was actually a very civil relationship for these POWs. And, you know, there were certainly mad Romanians. People were angry, but they did not mistreat the Americans. Now, Thomas's plane made it to the target, and he had just released his bomb load, or the bombardier had just released the bomb load, when a flak shell hit the cockpit, and his plane was observed going into a slight climb and then sliding over onto its left wing, and it crashed in a ball of flame. One of the occupants, the navigator, was pulled from the wreckage, still alive, but he died later in a hospital, so everybody on board was killed. And this is not the only such story that we have. There are hundreds of stories of bravery, of sacrifice, of tragedy on this day. It is considered the blackest day in the history of American military aviation. 1 August 1943, every single airman who went up into the sky received a Distinguished Flying Cross. 310 men killed, 108 captured, and lots of planes could not make it back. They were too damaged, they were low on fuel, so they had to land in Turkey, which was neutral. And at the time, and even still today, if you enter neutral territory as an armed aggressor, you get interned. So they were interned for the duration of the war. Although some of them managed to escape. There are some escape stories associated with Operation Tidal Wave that are really great. If you're into the sort of Great Escape kind of narratives of World War II, some of them are really special. Altogether, though, less than half the planes returned to Benghazi. And those that returned, most of them were so shot up that they couldn't fly again. Or at least not for a while. So these units that had taken part in this operation were absolutely devastated. And some of them had to be reformed. So now I'll talk about Donald. Donald was smart in that he avoided danger, it seems like. He had one air-to-air battle with a German pilot, and he received a Distinguished Flying Cross on his 50th mission. He altogether had 77 missions in his fighter, with the 78th Fighter Group. And this was a unit that was involved in some of the most brutal air-to-air combat of the war. He was escorting bombers on a regular basis, and he was apparently a very good pilot, and he was considered a very good man by his compatriots. But what it makes it a little difficult is that you get primary sources from the period. You get the Julio telegram, we'll look at it in a minute. You get these sources that tell you how he was lost, but they don't tell you what he was doing. It's a big blank. What is the mission? What was the nature of the target? And this is where the historian has to step in, because at the time that somebody's writing a report or writing a newspaper article in 1944, what they're doing is they're leaving out the loose lips, sink ships stuff, right? We don't want to give away the operational information. And it turns out that what he was doing was he was taking part in Operation Crossbow. Operation Crossbow was a desperate attempt to forestall Hitler's vengeance weapons campaign, the V-1 buzz bomb. The V-1 was the world's first cruise missile. It wasn't all that reliable, which shouldn't surprise you. I mean, if it's being built by slave labor, it's probably going to have some quality control issues. That one in the picture right there just sort of landed and didn't explode. And some of them did that, just because, again, quality control issues. But still, you can't count on things to not blow up. This is a modern mock-up of a V-1 rocket on the launcher, and you can see that it's this sort of rail ramp, which was big enough to be spotted from the air. So the aerial photography in northern France started finding these things in December 1943. They started finding all these sites, and it was quite clear early on that they were V-1 launch sites. So Churchill organized an offensive, an air offensive. And that's what he was doing. He was taking part in this air offensive. His plane was lost a few miles from a town called Rennes in France. And if you read the contemporary newspaper reports, you'll see that, they bombed Kiel and so on, and it mentions that there are bombers in the air, but it doesn't say what's happening in northern France. It just says there was action in northern France. It doesn't say what they're doing. Now, General Julio is the one who set up the notification system for families in World War II. So if your soldier was killed, captured, or wounded, you would be alerted to that by a Julio telegram would arrive. And the Julio telegram tells us that he was flying on his way back from the mission, from the target, when they were jumped by German fighters, and that he turned to attack the German fighters. And the missing aircrew report, that's another primary source, right? And it says that they were low on gas, bucking headwinds, when they got jumped by these German fighters. And immediately, Lieutenant Putnam broke right to help. I just want to underline that. It was a heroic act to be out of gas, to be far from home, and when the enemy attacks your friends, you go turn into danger. That's a heroic act. I would like to speak a little bit about historiography, if I could. Mark showed you this book, which is by James Dugan and Carol Stewart. And it is, even today, it was published in 1968, it still stands up. It is the single best book on Operation Tidal Wave and Ploesti. Very detailed. There is almost nothing that you can quibble with as a historian with this book. It stands the test of time, and not all historical works do that. Also, I want to recommend a couple other books here, if you're interested. Fortress Ploesti, The Campaign to Destroy Hitler's Oil by J. Stout, which goes beyond Operation Tidal Wave to describe the other 23 air raids on Ploesti. And this is where it starts to get interesting. The British, for example, the Royal Air Force, undertook 4 missions against Ploesti, but it was so heavily defended by night fighters using radar that the losses were just too high. So the RAF gave up on bombing Ploesti. Carl A. Spates and the Air War in Europe. This is an 800-plus page book. I don't expect you're going to read the whole thing. But the interesting thing about Ploesti and oil fields in general, oil targets in Germany, is that Spates wanted to go after them. He wanted to go after them hard. And Eisenhower did not want him to. This was actually a controversy within the bomber command. Bomber Harris, he was the British bomber commander. He said there's no way you can bomb accurately from 20,000 feet, especially not at night, so it's better to just bomb the cities, bomb out the cities, and then there will be no workers for the factories. That was his strategy. And we know now, with historical perspective, that this strategy did not work very well. Societies are actually not that fragile. The assumption was that as soon as the bombs come out of the sky, the people will panic, they'll want to surrender. That's not what happened. It's not what ever happens. And Carl Spates was ordered, for example, to hit the rail yards at Ploesti. And he said, sure. And somehow the bombs all missed the rail yards and hit the refineries. And Eisenhower said, stop that. But it worked so well that eventually reality won. And Carl Spates started hitting German POL, petroleum oil lubricant sites, with a vengeance. And that is how the Wehrmacht ground to a halt. The V weapons hunt, defeating German secret weapons by Colonel Roy Stanley. That is a detailed look at, of course, the campaign against the V weapons, including Operation Crossbow against the V1 buzz bombs. Although Melvin is not in there, the mission profile becomes clear. Once you read what dates these offensives were going on, it becomes clear that's what he was doing in that part of France, because that's the only reason that he would have been there. These two young men that you see here both went to war in a time when you actually had to fly a plane to the target. Let me just briefly point out that that argument over what to hit, whether you should hit oil or you should hit some other kind of target, maybe the cities, let's blow up the cities. That argument is still going on today. Russia, every day, is hitting Ukrainian cities on the assumption that they can break Ukrainian will to fight. Ukraine is driving Joe Biden crazy by driving up gas prices, by hitting oil sites in Russia. Right? So again, you have the same argument happening again in the 21st century. And the difference now is that we only have to send a drone. We send a machine, we don't send a man. That's what has changed. This is a photograph that Ed took of Uncle John being brought home. His remains were unidentified, and they were in a Romanian cemetery for, I think, 9 years. And then in the 1950s, there was a program that brought the Americans who were still buried in Romania home, or not home, but to a military cemetery in Italy. So he stayed there for a long time. My sister actually visited that cemetery several years ago because he was there. And his remains were finally brought to the United States and identified by DNA using Ed as the comparator, and we laid him to rest last May. And again, I can't thank this town enough for the reception that he got. It will always stand out as one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. Colonel Cade, the commander of Operation Tidal Wave, wrote this prayer to the fallen of Ploesti. To you who fly on forever, I send that part of me which cannot be separated and is bound to you for all time. I send you those of our hopes and dreams that never quite came true, the joyous laughter and showery tears of our boyhood, the marvelous mysteries of our adolescence, the glorious strength and tragic illusions of our young manhood. All these that were, and perhaps could have been, I leave in your care out there in the blue. If you would like to follow my work and see what else I have in store, this is my website URL, polemology.net. Polemology is the scientific study of war. I cover a lot of different topics, from primitive warfare to ancient warfare to Middle Ages warfare to modern warfare to 21st century warfare. If it's conflict, I cover it. I have a particular fascination with art depicting siege, for example. And so I cover all kinds of topics there, and please, if you have any interest, do come subscribe for updates. If anybody has any questions for me, I am happy to take those questions. I just want to end on that note, that it has been really a pleasure to come and meet you all again and share with you. And I hope that this research that I have been doing will turn into a book this year. I don't think it's going to be a very long book, but I would like to produce a volume, even if it's a slim volume, because this story needs to be told. You have two boys who really stand out as heroes from one tiny little town. That's the most American story I can think of or imagine. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for your kind attention.
Welcome, everybody. Mural Mania. I see some old friends here. Dorothy was there when we did Winston Stream 17 years ago. Blaine Smith was there in 2008 when we dedicated a couple murals in Clyde. So lots of my friends are around. Stuart was there. We put the mural up that day, the iconic mural, which we're fixing. We're known as the preservation of history through community art, telling historic stories. By painting these stories, we are able to portray a history lesson for everybody. There's a lot of kids that now know about the Erie Canal, or might know about Red Creek with Debbie Benson with the 5 windows of history. They had a circus in Red Creek. Come on, a circus in the 30s with elephants and tigers and bears. So those kind of things. So we're painting, we just got done with Red Creek. I'm over here painting the Woken, restoration of the Woken mural. And all of a sudden my phone wasn't working. So I went to my vehicle and was charging it. So I come in and pick it up, and the first story is about Ed Thomas. And I read it. I mean, there's lots of things that can show up on Facebook when you open your phone up, but that story showed up. And I read that he was a class of North Rose, Woken. And what we have here in these hallways is the North Rose Woken high school classes. They didn't go to school here. This is like to 8th grade, I believe. But when they combined North Rose Woken and Rose, they brought these photographs to this lovely place over here. So I walked down the hall, starting with 41, because they said it was I'm not sure when he listed. Then I got to 38, class president of 38. And I was like moved to tears. I'm by myself down here. And I immediately said, I gotta go to the funeral, the calling hours, which was a couple days later. And then I walk in, and it was incredibly moving. Thanks for the display. It was his uniform, his medals were all there. And I might have disrupted Ed a little bit that day, but my wheels were spinning. I said, Ed, I want to do a mural about your uncle, because this is incredible. And he took it in, and then we had a presentation over in Newark, and he came to that meeting, so we're going to do it. Well, and I posted this story on Facebook. And a couple of days later, my friend from high school, Gary Grimmond, his friend in high school was Donald, his dad's friend in high school. And Dad started pulling this together. He sent me these photos. And in the meantime, I want to say I met Matt at the calling hours. And I told Matt, and we talked a little bit more than I did with Ed about the mural. And so, but I've got Matt's contact. And when you do the preservation of history, you got to do it right. So I was calling Matt all the time. How many planes, how many B-17s need to be in there? He said, lots, lots. So, in what colors, you know? We all, the team will have you all up here in a minute. We know how many times we went through colors on schemes and airplanes. And what's a B-17, what's a B-24? Well, they get a little education and all that. So I was in Florida sending back and forth pictures. But I want to say that, so I toyed around with this all summer, how are we going to do this? And then Mark Williams, he's working on our bicentennial design now. I'll have him up here in a minute. Designed this for me. He's a retired art teacher from North Rose N.Y. And he was immediately able to, there's a sketch on the table down here, and you can look at it, it almost looks like what's painted up here. And then we started tackling this, was it maybe October or November of 23, and painted throughout the winter. So, and like I said, Matt was writing these, in the summer he started writing these short stories about, and I wish they were all here for the read, and you can get them on this website, and they'll all be part of this wonderful book that's coming out. And I'm thinking, movie too. I mean, you kidding me? This is, I actually,
right here.
Right. I called the National Museum over in New Orleans about this. I said, you got to hear this story. And they actually responded to me. And actually I had been watching Masters of the Air. If you get a chance, please watch that miniseries. It's on Apple TV. It's not this mission, but it's about the B-17s, the Bloody Hundredth. Crosby wrote this book. He was a navigator. But the Munster mission, that's the one that Matt talked about where Donald engaged the Germans. That's the mission that they lost 12 out of 13 B-17s that day. And part of me, you talked about bombing cities. Okay, the Americans, what was the general's name that decided to do that?
Bomber Harris.
Bomber Harris. At the time, we were bombing factories, ball bearing factories, because we had to bomb their infrastructure. But this general decided we're going to bomb the city. You know what time he did it in the day? 12 o'clock on Sunday, when people were coming out of church. Who took the low road then? We did. The Germans were in concentration camps, but at that point, we took the low road. And I don't know, God looks at stuff, but we lost 12 planes that day. And the only one that made it back was Rosenberg. And he had Germans coming in from every angle. And he was such a good pilot, he would turn the plane up this way or that way, and the gunners would shoot down the Germans. Made it back with 2 engines and crashed in England. He went on to do 52 missions. And the last one, he got captured. He made his plane get into Russia, so he'd get captured by the Russians. And he witnessed a concentration camp as a Jew. And he went back to Nuremberg and spoke at those trials. So, I just come engrossed with this whole World War II history. I read Wing and a Prayer, and I'm writing Ploesti. So I can't say enough about math research and reinforcing that. And I want to say, if we still got room for plaques up here, and if you want to be part of that, you can fill a donation out from $100 to the $500. We haven't got any 250s yet, but we've got a lot of 500s. That's okay. But I want to bring up my mural team who helped bring this to fruition, because without them we wouldn't be able to do this. So come on up here. We're not all here, but come on up. Oh yeah. So I'm going to grab this. These two. Mark, you want to hold those up? Sure. That's Mark's design. But what I like about it, he grids everything. See this? Look at that grid. So you know what you're doing. If you go into their studio, you can see the grid for a couple murals right now. One the Bicentennial, and one for Camillus, we're doing a mural on the Seneca Chief, which was the first boat that went down the Erie Canal. So he's been a great asset for us, and he's doing a lot of illustrations for us. And on this, and we got Bev Owen here, who's been with me since 2010. painted Macedon, Savannah, and she's come and gone and come back into the fold again. And Christina, she joined us in painting on the Urger, was it Urger or the E56 one? And we have Corey too. Corey's a veteran who made it tonight, but she's been with us and gone through some medical experiences, cancer last year, and she's here. And the tough part was we had a thin team for a while because Bev was going through leukemia, cancer, and we pulled it together and painted this, and amongst other ones. So I can't thank you enough for being part of this wonderful team. And you can see this mural that's going to be in the Rose Cemetery. I took the time to drive up there and find both their graves. And we're going to have a place where you can find it easier, because it took me a while the first time. I looked in my rearview mirror and I seen an airplane on the gravestone. I said, that's got to be Donald. I had to call Matt to find Ploesti. And I was able to reference his photograph from the tree that was across the street. And I said, I think it's over here. And I found it. At that time, I didn't have the marker. And then a couple of weeks ago, I said they got it on. It's on there now. So that'll be special. I even heard from Debbie Benson, and she told me that there's a Custer's Last Stand person buried over there, soldier. So it says Patriotic Cemetery. So we've opened that door. So we want to learn more about this incredible history. So Debbie Hall here, it's been a great, we talked about getting this together. I said, Matt, when I've been talking to Matt back and forth, you got to get this guy up here. He's such a wealth of knowledge. You go on and on about his war stories. What was the one you told about the bugler? Tell the bugler story. I thought that was pretty cool. It's just awesome. Just think about Benghazi. It was our safety haven then. Look at Benghazi a couple years ago.
Iran, then Persia, became a transfer point between the Allies, right? The trade route, or the supplies came up through to Russia, through Iran. And at the end of the war, there was a legion of Polish POWs, because remember, Russia was on the wrong side in 1939? Remember that part? Shh, don't tell anybody. And they were marching home. They were going through Iran, and they came to a little town. I don't remember the name of the town right now, but they camped outside the town. The townspeople found out that they were Polish and got very excited. And they were like, what's going on? Why are these people excited? The next morning, the Polish Legion got up, they played the bugle, you know, the reveille. And the townspeople got all excited. It turned out that the archer who had shot the bugler in the tower of the castle of Krakow, or the cathedral of Krakow, in 1241, was from this village. And the act of shooting that bugler in the tower had brought a curse on the town. And now the curse was lifted because a Polish army had showed up and played a bugle. True story. Isn't that wonderful?
I heard that yesterday. I gotta tell you guys that. So behind us is this wonderful mural, and you can see the German planes, and there's the red apple, Beth painted the apple on there, and we got, I think there was like 3 or 4, they called them the little boys in the war, or the little guys that would support the B-17s. But they couldn't follow them all the way to they ran out of gas. It wasn't until the Mustangs had an extra tank that they could go along further in mission. Air superiority, there was no Europeans or we weren't fighting in Europe until after D-Day. We were fighting in Italy. But this is depicting both wars here. And you can see the planes crashing. One of the things that happened is, on this mission, is they crashed into a woman's prison and killed a woman prisoner. So there's many incredible accounts that you can read in the book about this. But it was, you can go up and read both of these plaques. because it tells their stories. And the amount of medals both of these guys got. And thank you for bringing in. Those are awesome. So, if anybody has any questions, but I mean, I have to say, this is probably my most important or most meaningful mural of preservation of history that I've ever done. And it will be with me forever, because I know the sacrifices these guys did. So, thank you, Rose.